So this is a little test on our YouTube. We've been reading Creepshow. You can go over there, same name, check it out. But I also wanted to do something like this on here. So today we got some scary stories. Hello, anybody watching? But yeah, I want to either maybe do an edit of this later, but for now, I have a ton of scary storybooks and thought I'd read some. I guess have some, those of you in the same time zone, lunchtime, scary stories. So we'll start with the big toe. And yeah, scary stories to tell in the dark. This is like all of them, 1 through 3 or something. Scary stories 1, 2, and 3. So this probably will be more than one. And my camera fell immediately. Like I said, the first time. This is why we also the test time. All right. The big toe. A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. He tried to pick it up, but it was stuck to something. So he gave it a good hard jerk, and it came off in his hand. Then he heard something groan and scamper away. The boy took the toe into the kitchen and showed it to his mother. "It looks nice and plump," she said. "I'll put it in the soup and we'll have it for supper." That night his father carved the toe into 3 pieces, and they each had a piece. Then they did the dishes, and when it got dark, they went to bed. The boy fell asleep almost at once, but in the middle of the night a sound awakened him. It was something out in the street. It was a voice. It was calling to him. "Where's my toe?" it groaned. When they heard that, he got very scared, but he thought, "It doesn't know where I am. It never will find me." Then he heard the voice once more, only now it was closer. "Where's my toe?" it groaned. The boy pulled the blankets over his head and closed his eyes. "I'll go to sleep," he thought. "When I wake up, it'll be gone." But soon he heard the back door open, and again he heard the voice. "Where's my toe?" it groaned. Then the boy heard footsteps move through the kitchen, into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall. Then slowly they climbed the stairs. Closer and closer they came. Soon they were in the upstairs hall. Now they were outside his door. "Where's my toe?" the voice groaned. His door opened, shaking with fear. He listened as the footsteps slowly moved through the dark toward his bed. Then they stopped. "Where's my toe?" the voice groaned. "You've got it!" So I guess that one was only 9 pages. So I guess we'll just go on to the next one. This one is titled The Walk. Try to show all the illustrations. There aren't many. I think 1 per story. The Walk. My uncle was walking down a lonely dirt road one day. He came upon a man who was also walking down that road. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was scared of my uncle, and my uncle was scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and it began to get dark. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was very scared of my uncle, and my uncle was very scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and they came to a big woods. It was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was really scared of my uncle, and my uncle was really scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and deep down into the woods they went. It was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was terrified of my uncle, and the uncle was terrified. Read a couple more. This one is called What Do You Come From? There was an old woman who lived all by herself, and she was very lonely. Sitting in the kitchen one night, she said, "Oh, I wish I had some company." No sooner had she spoken than down the chimney tumbled 2 feet, from which the flesh had rotted. The old woman's eyes bulged with terror. Then 2 legs dropped to the hearth and attached themselves to the feet. Then a body tumbled down. Then 2 arms and a man's head. As the old woman watched, the parts came together into a great gangling man. The man danced around and around the room. Faster and faster he went. Then he stopped, and he looked into her eyes. "What do you come from?" she asked in a small voice that shivered and shook. "What do I come for?" he said. "I come for you." This one I know is one of the more popular ones. This is Mitai Doti Walker. I like the illustration for this one. There was a haunted house where every night a bloody head fell down the chimney. At least, that's what people said, so nobody would stay there overnight. Then a rich man offered $200 to whoever would do it, and this boy said he would try if he could have his dog with him, so it was all settled. The very next night, the boy went to the house with his dog. To make it more cheerful, he started a fire in the fireplace. Then he sat in front of the fire and waited, and his dog waited with him. For a while nothing happened, but a little after midnight he heard someone singing softly and sadly off in the woods. The singing sounded like this: "Meaty Doty Walker." "It's just somebody singing," the boy told himself, but he was frightened. Then his dog answered the song, softly and sadly. It sang, "Lynchy, Kinchy, Kali, Molly, Dingo, Dingo." The boy could not believe his ears. His dog had never uttered a word before. Then a few minutes later, he heard the singing again. Now it was closer and louder, but the words were the same. "Meaty Doty Walker." This time the boy tried to stop his dog from answering. He was afraid that whoever was singing would hear it and come after them, but his dog paid no attention, and again sang, "Lynchy, Kinchy, Kali, Molly, Dingo, Dingo." A half hour later, the boy heard the singing again. Now it was in the backyard, and the song was the same. "Meaty Doty Walker." Again, the boy tried to keep his dog quiet, but the dog sang out even louder, "Lynchy, Kinchy, Kali, Molly, Dingo, Dingo." Soon the boy heard the singing again. Now it was coming down the chimney. "Meaty Doty Walker." The dog sang right back, "Lynchy, Kinchy, Kali, Molly, Dingo, Dingo." Suddenly a bloody head fell out of the chimney. It missed the fire and landed right next to the dog. The dog took one look at it and fell over, dead from fright. The head turned and stared at the boy. Slowly it opened its mouth and sang again. We're going to do the haunted house. I don't know why I showed you that. The picture's right here. It's this one. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and he went to the house. He went on in. He built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp. Sat there reading the Bible. Then just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth, and then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again. Step, step, step up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating, trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again. Slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step. It was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light back in her eye sockets, and she had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could finally rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her left hand, to lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight. I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed, like she was tired, and she sunk down toward the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. That next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock. He did, and he found a big sack of money, and where the haunt had held on to his coat, the print of those bony fingers were burned right into the cloth. It never did come out. I'm going to read The Wendigo. That will be our final one for today. The Wendigo. A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people had ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found a native who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The native's name was Defago. They made a camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night, a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent listening to the wind, howling, and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling, and the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it were calling Defago's name. "Defago," it called. "Defago." I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Defago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in the corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. "What's all this about?" the hunter asked. "It's nothing," Defago said. But the wind continued to call him, and Defago became more tense and more restless. "Defago," it called. "Defago." Suddenly he jumped to his feet, and he began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. "You can't leave me out here," the hunter shouted. Then the wind called out again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire!" Then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down toward the lake, then out onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken got longer and longer. They were so long, no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but there they disappeared. At first he thought that Defago had fallen to the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought about something had pulled him off the ice and into the sky, but that didn't make any sense. As he stood wondering what had happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from up above, and again he heard Defago screaming, "My fiery feet! My burning feet!" But there was nothing to be seen. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left some food for Defago and started out. Weeks later, he reached civilization. The following year, he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since. Maybe it was the Wendigo, one of them said, and he laughed. It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the natives say. A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again, and a native came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him. He wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and asked, "Are you Defago?" The native didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. No answer. To get a look at him, he lifted his hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ash. I know I keep saying last one, but we're going to read The Hook. Donald and Sarah went to the movies. Then they went for a ride in Donald's car. They parked up on a hill at the edge of town. From there they could see the lights up and down the valley. Donald turned on the radio and found some music, but an announcer broke in with a news bulletin. A murderer had escaped from the state prison. He was armed with a knife and was headed south on foot. His left hand was missing, and in its place he wore a hook. "Let's roll up the windows and lock the door," said Sarah. "That's a good idea," said Donald. "That prison isn't too far away. Maybe we should just go home," said Sarah. "But it's only 10 o'clock, said Donald. "I don't care what time it is," she said. "I want to go home." "Look, Sarah, he's not going to climb all the way up here. Why would he do that? Even if he did, all the doors are locked. How could he get in?" "Donald, he could take that hook and break through a window and open the door," Sarah said. "I'm scared and I want to go home." Donald was annoyed. Girls are always afraid of something," he said. As he started the car, Sarah thought she heard something or someone scratching at her door. "Do you hear that?" she asked as they roared away. "It sounded like somebody was trying to get in." "Oh, sure," said Donald. Soon they got to her house. "Would you like to come in and have some cocoa?" she asked. "No," he said. "I gotta get home." He went around to the other side of the car to let her out. Hanging on the door handle was a hook. Dun, dun, dun. But yes, I will stop there for now. But if you do watch this after the fact, let me know if you like the readings. I have a couple different ideas, as you can see behind me. A lot of different books, and I'd like to keep doing this. But until next time.